He's doing.
Good morning, everyone. I think we'd like to get started and reward those who are prompt. Welcome to our first meeting of the Joint Legislative Audit Committee. Why don't we start off with a roll call?
Yes.
Assemblymember Murasucci.
Here.
Acosta.
Here.
Baker. Here. Nazarian. Obernolte. Here. Rubio. Here. Wood. Senator Roth.
Here.
Bell. Cannella. Fuller. Lara. Here. Mendoza. Skinner.
All right. So we do not have a quorum yet, and so we will be proceeding as a committee. Welcome, everyone. This is the first of several hearings we will be convening on audit requests for this session. Before we take up the audit requests, we have a couple of housekeeping items that we need to take care of. First, we need to elect the chair of the committee. Yes, and so I think we need to wait for the quorum for that, yeah. All right. And we will also wait for the adoption of the committee rules. I hope that all the committee members receive copies of the rules. And so we will go forward and receive a update on the state auditor audits. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Elaine Howell, California State Auditor. So the status report that I'd like to present is we currently have 18 audits in progress. 3 of those are statutory audits that we're required to do. One is our annual financial audit. We issued a financial audit today, opinion on the financial statements, and we commence the next year's audit immediately, so that will show up on our audits in progress. We also are currently conducting an audit of the State Bar. We're required to audit the State Bar biennially, so this is the year we need to issue that report and are working to get that done by June. The JLAC audits, as I said, we have 15 JLAC audits in progress. We have commenced all of the audits that the committee approved last year, so we do not have any audits that are awaiting staff. As far as resources that are currently available to commence any of the audits that are approved today, we have 10 teams essentially available between April and June. But I did want to clarify for the members, the majority of those audits can start in April. We have 5 or 6 teams freeing up in April, so depending on the number of audits you approve today, we will be able to commence those audits relatively soon, about the month of April primarily. I did want to let you know thus far this year we've issued 13 reports. 5 of those are statutory audits. Some are the JLAC audits that were approved. 4 JLAC audits. 1 investigative report. We do have an investigative function where we're responsible for administering the California Whistleblower Protection Act. We try to issue at least 2 reports a year summarizing our investigative work. We did issue one of those earlier this year. And intend to issue another one later in the summer. And then we also issue some special reports that we hope you find helpful, a report of legislative recommendations that we've made in audits, and certainly some of the subcommittee reports where we give a status on any of the recommendations we've made in previous reports, what action particular agencies have taken or in some cases not taken to implement those recommendations. So we've already produced a fair amount of work in the first few months of this year. But again, as I said, it's my understanding 1 audit was pulled from the agenda, so there are 6 to be considered today, and we do have the resources to start those audits as early as April of next week. With that, members, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions about any of the audits we currently have underway as far as timing, et cetera. I certainly can't talk about substance because they are confidential, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Any questions from the committee for our auditor? Seeing none? Thank you very much. Why don't we proceed then we still do not have a quorum, but we will proceed with the presentation of the audit requests. For the audit requests, we will follow the normal format, the standard format for the members presenting with their audit requests by sign-in order. The members of the committee will present their audit requests last. Each member may have up to 2 witnesses to make brief statements during the presentation. This will be followed by the state auditor's presentation of her analysis. We will invite the affected agency or agencies to come forward to make a brief comment and answer any questions, and this will be followed by questions from committee members. The public would then be invited to comment on their support or opposition to each audit request after the committee members' questions and answers. And so with that, I would like to invite our first audit request by sign-in order, item number 2017-107, the Santa Clara County Registrar of Voters. Okay. Before we proceed, let's call roll again for quorum.
Assemblymember Murasucci.
Here.
Acosta.
Here.
Baker. Here. Nazarian. Obernolte. Rubio. Here. Wood. Senator Roth.
Here.
Bell. Cannella. Fuller. Here. Lara. Here. Mendoza. Here. Skinner.
Madam Secretary, do we have a quorum? Yes, thank you.
Mr. Chair, before we start, I would move to elect you as the chair of the Joint Legislative Audit Committee.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Motion to elect chair. Assemblymember Murasucci.
Aye.
Murasucci, aye. Acosta.
Aye.
Acosta, aye. Baker. Baker, aye. Nazarian. Obernolte. Obernolte, aye. Rubio. Rubio, aye. Wood. Senator Roth.
Aye.
Roth, aye. Bell. Cannella. Fuller. Fuller, aye. Lara. Lara, aye. Mendoza. Mendoza, aye. Skinner.
Thank you very much, senators and members. I look forward to working with all of you.
Mr. Chair, I further move the adoption of the committee rules.
All right. Motion's been made and seconded. You should have received copies of the proposed rules in your binder. These rules were modified in several places to include provisions for the auditor to propose audits of local governments under the high-risk local government audit program for the committee's approval. There was also a change on Committee Rule 17 on page 3, modified to increase the maximum cost of an urgent audit from $75,000 to $120,000. A request for an urgent audit that the chair and vice chair can approve during interim or recess. Are there any questions regarding the proposed committee rules?
I do have one, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
And you may be addressing this later, and that is, it's not so much in the rules, but part of the conversation, if we'll be able to brief the committee on plans for the reappointment or the appointment of an auditor. I may be out of order, actually, but I want to make sure if we have a chance to inquire about that and find out your hopes and intentions for how we proceed as a committee.
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Baker. I see that is a bullet point of following this, and so we will address that, but thank you for bringing that up. So members, it takes a majority vote of the committee to approve the committee rules. A motion's been made and seconded. Secretary, please call the roll.
Motion to adopt 2017-18 committee rules. Assemblymember Murasucci.
Aye.
Murasucci, aye. Acosta.
Aye.
Acosta, aye. Baker. Aye. Baker, aye. Nazarian. Obernolte. Aye. Obernolte, aye. Rubio. Aye. Rubio, aye. Wood. Senator Roth.
Aye.
Roth, aye. Bell. Cannella. Fuller. Aye. Fuller, aye. Lara. Aye. Lara, aye. Mendoza. Aye. Mendoza, aye. Skinner.
All right. Committee rules have been adopted, and so now we are moving to the third bullet point of general business, which is the state auditor appointment. So, as the new chair of this committee, I inherited a situation that was begun from the previous chair of this committee. As we all know, the appointment of the state auditor was put over from last year to this year. At that point, at the direction of last year's chair, Mr. Rodriguez, applications for the state auditor position were solicited. We have 3 candidates, including our state auditor. And after consulting with the vice chair and members of the committee on both sides of the aisle, I've decided that we will move forward with the appointment process as set forth in statute. We will be convening a special session to be announced in the near future for the entire committee to participate, review, and evaluate the candidates. The special session will be a closed session, given that this is a personnel matter, and that is the direction of the chair. Do we have any questions from the committee? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, do we have a timeline for when we will convene to address this issue?
We have some logistical issues that we need to address, Senator, but of course we do not want to delay this process any more than necessary, and so we expect to conduct this in the next couple months. Yes.
Couple months?
A couple of months on the conservative side, yes. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting us know. I appreciate the transparency of it. I think that's important, given what the audit process is always intended to be, which is independent, free of partisan conversation. I just want to thank you for being in conversations with members on both sides of the aisle and both chambers about it. I would urge us to do our best to be well before 2 months from now, because we'll get well into another part of the year. I'm sure I would make myself available for any special session, as other members would as well. And if there's anything that we as a committee can do to expedite that scheduling, I hope I can speak on behalf of all my colleagues that we'll be happy to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. How long is the appointment for?
So the appointment will be for the statutory provided 4-year term. Yes. Senator.
I'd just like to add my support to Assemblymember Baker's comments to say that I don't feel that we should let too much of the term go by. We should clear this up and get it done and move on. I appreciate your diligence in bringing it forward so that we can take action on it soon. Thank you.
Yes. All right. I believe we probably are unanimous in wanting to move forward with the process as quickly as possible, and so I will make that happen. All right. Any other questions regarding the process going forward? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Lowe, for your patience. Please come forward. Again, this is item 2017-107, the Santa Clara County Registrar of Voters election process. Assemblymember Lowe, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members. I appreciate the opportunity to present before you today. First off, let me thank very much this committee and committee staff for the analysis that has been provided in front of you. As the chair of the Elections and Redistricting Committee, I've taken a great responsibility to focus on the integrity of the electoral process. And in particular, in my county, there have been a number of issues that have occurred between 2010 and 2016, as noted in your analysis. Some of those mistakes include vote-by-mail ballots that were mailed to individuals who are not eligible to vote. The county voter information pamphlets were missing ballot arguments or provided voters with the wrong ballot argument for local measures. Sample ballots that were mailed to voters that were missing the entire section of candidates. Actual ballots that were provided to voters that were missing sections of candidates, and incorrectly counted vote-by-mail ballots that should have been disqualified. I understand that it is not uncommon for mistakes to occur in a natural process, but the frequency of such errors is of significant concern. And so I am very much focused on ensuring the electoral process for the public and ensuring that we have transparency and accessibility. It is for these reasons that I believe an independent audit with the County Registrar of Voters in Santa Clara County is called for to safeguard the constitutional rights of all people. The goal of this audit is to assess the degree to which problems in recent elections were isolated errors or evidence of more systemic problems. Additionally, the focus of the audit request is to identify the root causes of these errors and to assess risks and vulnerabilities in order to prevent future activities. And I also want to make mention that we have our registrar here, Shannon Bushi, and I appreciate the commitment that she has made, and we've been in conversation since the inception of the conversation of such an audit request. And again, I want to reemphasize the importance of a partnership in this role to try and solve this collectively. With that, I respectfully ask for your support of this audit request.
Okay. Let me, before I give the Registrar an opportunity to respond, the State Auditor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Assemblymember Lowe indicated, this would be an audit of the Santa Clara County Registrar's Office, and there's just a handful of objectives. The first objective is really to get a handle on the office's procedures, policies, et cetera, for reviewing and distributing election-related materials, and making sure that they're complying with statutory requirements, certainly, but any internal policies, procedures, et cetera. Then to determine whether or not the Registrar's Office actually has contingency plans to address election-related issues. So if there are mistakes or problems that occur, do they have a contingency plan? Mr. Lowe wants us to assess that plan and determine whether or not that plan is effective. In addition, he wants us to evaluate the Registrar's Office, their oversight of vendors who are providing services, printing election materials, printing ballots, et cetera, to make sure that there's proper oversight to mitigate or reduce the number of errors that occur or how to address an error when it does occur. In addition, he's asked us to select a sample of election errors and really take a look at what has been attributed to vendors, evaluate corrective actions that the Registrar's Office took to address those errors, and whether or not those actions really comply with their policies, procedures, et cetera. Another important issue that he's asked us to look at is outreach. So in the event there is an error, and the Registrar's Office identifies that, what type of communication is the Registrar's Office engaging in with the voters in Santa Clara County to make sure they're aware of the error and what they can do as a voter to make sure that they have the proper ballot and their vote is appropriately counted. And then the last issue he's asked us to look at is to determine what the Registrar's Office is doing to prevent these types of errors from occurring in the future. It's one thing to have a system, have a contingency plan, you address an error, but then after that, what are you doing to shore up your control so that hopefully this type of error doesn't occur in the future? The budget on this audit is a little over 2,000 hours, relatively small audit. It should take us, and that's staff time, take us about 5 months to conduct this audit and complete it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Would we have a representative from the Santa Clara Registrar of Voters? Please welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Shannon Boucher. I'm the Santa Clara County Registrar of Voters. I came here just to provide you a little bit of information. Our goal in Santa Clara County is to provide the best election experience for our voters. And we do try to strive for accurate and efficient elections. And yes, errors do happen in the election process. Part of that, one thing I would like to say is, the law is structured to allow limited time from when candidate statements, measure information come in, to then process and prepare the sample ballot pamphlets and the ballots. There's a lot of information to process. We have a high number of languages. In addition to English, we translate all of our voting materials into 4 additional languages, and we also translate facsimile ballots for the polling places in another 4 additional languages. So we do have very complex elections in Santa Clara County. We have a large number of jurisdictions, over about 80 jurisdictions that we handle elections for, and a large amount of contests. That we had over 100 contests on the one last November ballot. But with all that said, yes, we have made mistakes throughout time, different unique situations, whether it's programming or proofreading or missing a document, sending it to ballot layout. So we do agree with that. We're very transparent. We have been very transparent for that. We do have a standard protocol in place depending on the size of the issue. Is it a few voters that are affected? Is it a district-wide race? We do such things as press releases. We send direct mailings to the voters in special marked red lettered, envelopes so that they stand out. We do media interviews. We put information at the polling places on our website. We do everything we can to be very transparent about what has happened. So I'm very confident in our response and outreach, and more than willing to share all of that. And as far as the vendors and internally, whether it's a vendor error, yes, we try to do more oversight with the vendor. We've actually fired a printing vendor after the 2010 election with smudging as being an error. And internally, we've tried to develop some checklists and tools, second set of proofing. Maybe it's a different division that proofs the documents instead of the main division accepting the documents. So we take those very seriously, when they happen. So I just wanted to let you know that, and we're very transparent, and I'm very willing to work with the auditor if you so order the audit. And thank you for hearing me.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Ms. Baker.
Thank you. Thank you, Member Lowe, for bringing this forward. As you know, accuracy and accessibility, advancement in our elections is an area I share that passion with you as well. I do have a couple of questions. One is, this is a committee and this is a state auditor, and we're talking about an audit that just particularly goes to one county. It's not even trying to compare to others to look for best practices across the state. And I'm usually personally a little wary of using the auditor for that very localized purpose. This is a county level entity. I don't know if it's elected or appointed, but it's one that I'm curious why this is something that needs to go to the state level as opposed to, say, the county taking some responsibility for looking at its own county registrar of voters and what the internals should be on that.
Sure. And just to clarify, the registrar is appointed by the county. And with respect to this issue, as I mentioned earlier, as chair of elections, I sort of took a look at what we might be doing in all 58 counties. And we assessed various counties in terms of some of the procedures. My elections committee staff and I met extensively to assert and assess that. Accordingly, but the conclusion or result was such that the county of Santa Clara, which I am part of, had these systemic problems. No other county to that extent has had such issues. So again, to address the question at hand, we did take a look at all various counties, but this county stood out in particular with these issues.
Very helpful. And I remember the smudged ballots in the 2010 election cycle became a local news story. So here it is 7 years later. I hope that this is a helpful audit. Which is my next question. So this is something that some recommendations will presumably come out of this, and yet is it going to be up to the county and the registrar to do that, or will, then we might need legislation at the state level to tell a local county what to do. I should put it in the form of a question to the county registrar. Is this something that will be helpful to you? And then to the member, how would you plan on working with the local county on how to implement what has to be done locally without hopefully having us come in from the state and tell Santa Clara what they have to do?
Well, any recommendations, if any auditor coming in to look at it would be helpful for us. We have done our internal analysis. Part of the county's Harvey Rose audit team also just completed an audit in our office on other topics in a written report, but verbally we discussed with the county auditor these type of errors, and they had personally concluded that we had sufficient avenues in place. Anyone or the auditor is welcome to speak to the management auditor because there is nothing in the written report that relates to it. But we're always open to better ways of doing things or suggestions.
And the other thing I might add is that the county, as previously was mentioned, did do an audit which focused on costs and efficiencies, like the return, like why is it so slow to get the return ballot, or consolidated precincts, for example, whereas this audit request focuses on some of the other issues, systemic issues at hand too. So there is a significant difference in how we would be able to work with them. As I mentioned, oftentimes I think audits might be more adversarial in nature, but this is a collaborative effort to which I know that we'll be able to partner in all parties for the same desired outcome.
Thank you. I'm pleased to support it. I hope that it will be something that will teach us about other offices and that this isn't too terribly localized and that it won't take legislation at the state level to implement whatever's necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Baker. Any other questions from the committee? If not, is there anyone in the audience who would like to make any public comments on this audit request? Seeing no one coming forward, Mr. Lowe, would you like to close?
I just would like to thank this committee and also our state auditor and our registrar for the partnership to date, and with that, respectfully ask for your support in this audit.
All right, Mr. Lowe, thank you very much for your very important audit request here. I will be supporting this audit request. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll, please? Motion's been made and seconded by Senator Roth and seconded by Mr. Obernolte. Roll call, please.
Motion to approve request 2017-107. Assemblymember Marsucci.
Aye.
Marsucci, aye. Acosta.
Aye.
Acosta, aye. Baker. Aye. Baker, aye. Nazarian. Obernolte. Obernolte, aye. Rubio. Aye. Rubio, aye. Wood. Senator Roth. Aye. Roth, aye. Bell. Cannella. Fuller. Aye. Fuller, aye. Lara. Mendoza. Skinner.
Okay, we are short a few votes, and so this request would be on call. We will be adding on votes. Thank you, Mr. Lowe. Nice to meet you. Okay.
Thank you.
By sign-in order is item 2017-101, the concealed carry weapon permitting process and fees, by Assemblymember McCarty. Welcome, Mr. McCarty.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair. I'm here this morning to respectfully request an audit to analyze the process and the fee structure related to the concealed weapon policy in California. I was first alerted to this issue, as the analysis notes, with our county officials here are going to testify in a few seconds, related to budget shortfalls. This focuses first on the fee structure. On budget shortfalls they were facing by almost $250,000 because of the large increase in permits issued in Sacramento County. The number of permits rose from about 300 a year in 2010 to over 8,000 a year in 2016, and with that came increased costs, and costs that were essentially borne by the taxpayers of Sacramento County. And so it's come to our attention that certain fees are kind of cost recovery, whether it's the county clerk services, building inspection, waste management. And so we wanted to have our state auditor take a look at this to make sure our state law has in place a proper structure to ensure that there is proper fee recovery based upon the current limitations in this penal code with the fee structure set in the state statute. And secondly, the audit takes a look at the issues of good cause. And what that really means is that whether it's discretionary or there are basically increased vetting for counties. This recently was discussed in a U.S. Court of Appeals decision where San Diego basically had their policy upheld that individuals, it was okay for them to have to show facts distinguishing that the applicant was different from the mainstream as far as threats to their individual person and basically imminent harm, and that policy that was decided did not violate the Second Amendment under the United States Constitution. So these two issues, raise a number of questions. There are many more questions and answers, and so this is something that we thought the state auditor could take a look at what counties are doing across California. I did want to note right away in the audit that we talked about having two counties. Sacramento County, of course, is one we've been discussing. San Diego, because of this Supreme Court decision. And he's not here right now, but Mr. Mendoza, I think, wanted to make a motion that we add the third county of Los Angeles County. So I'm open to clarifying that so it wouldn't impact the scope of the audit. So that would be the third county that we're discussing. And this is a local control issue. Of course, county sheriffs are independently elected. We're going to hear from our county sheriff in a few seconds. He has some thoughts on this. But it does have statewide implications. Here I represent two districts in my assembly district. Yolo County has a very strict interpretation of what good cause means, and Sacramento County does not. So individuals could receive a CCW in Contra Costa County and then go to Los Angeles County and back and forth. So our 58 counties, individual policies do have a statewide impact. So that's why having this perspective would be helpful. So with that, I want to now turn it over to our local elected official with the Sacramento County Board of Supervisors, Patrick Kennedy.
Thank you, Member McCarty. I appreciate your leadership on this. And Mr. Chair, congratulations, first of all. And members of the committee, my name is Patrick Kennedy. I represent Sacramento County Supervisorial District 2. If you have a secondary residence south of downtown, I'm your secondary supervisor. Here today to speak to the request and support it on behalf of the county. This is not a question of whether or not concealed weapons permits should be allowed, should not be allowed. It's simply, from our perspective, a question of whether or not the fees are adequate to cover the costs of the permitting. As the Assembly member said, we currently take about a $250,000 hit to our general fund every year to cover these costs, and so I'm sure that an audit report would find that that is pretty much the same in other counties, and also whether or not those vetting procedures that are in place are adequate to protect the public within all 58 counties of California. So with that, I strongly request an aye to the audit request.
Any further witnesses? No? Okay. State Auditor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Assemblymember McCarty indicated, he's asking us to look at three counties. It was San Diego and Sacramento were specifically named in his request. The original request suggested that we select another county. If it's the pleasure of the committee to choose L.A., we'd be happy to include L.A., and that won't affect the scope of the audit because we were intending to visit three counties based on his request. So the first objective that he's asked us to look at is really gathering some statistics from these different counties over a 3-year window, 3 fiscal years, identifying the number of concealed weapon licenses, new licenses issued, renewed licenses, any amended licenses, certainly those that were denied, and then any that were revoked. So gathering some statistics for those 3 counties for a 3-year window. Then at each of the counties, he is asking us to look at the licensing authorities and their practices. Are they following existing law in issuing licenses, in collecting adequate evidence to support and demonstrate good cause, one of the factors that has to be considered in determining whether to issue a license? And then are they enforcing the responsibility by revoking licenses when they've received notification that a license holder is no longer eligible to have a concealed weapon? So assessing what the licensing authorities are doing to follow those laws, the issuing portion, but also in the event they need to revoke, are they doing that and are they doing it promptly? In addition, He's asked us to look at factors that the licensing authorities are considering before issuing a license. He's really asking us to take a look at the law and determining whether or not the statute with respect to good cause needs any kind of modification. I think we will be able to make a recommendation based on my legal team. We'll take a look at this, but also talking to those 3 counties and really understanding and comparing how one county handles what they deem sufficient evidence for good cause versus another county. Are there inconsistencies? Does there need to be perhaps clarification in the statute? So Mr. McCarty is asking us to look at that. The last objective, as Mr. McCarty indicated, talks about the fiscal aspect of the program. He's asking us to compare and contrast fiscal information about this program across these licensing authorities at the 3 counties. So looking at their budgets and their costs for administering the concealed carry weapon licensing program, the enforcement aspect of the program. What amount of fees are they charging? Are they collecting those fees? And whether or not the fees actually comply with law. Are they charging fees that are appropriate and they're allowed to charge? But also looking at, have they had to make any adjustments to those fees? And what have those adjustments been based on? Just the CPI, or has it been based on increased volume and analysis of costs, and they're increasing the fees to try to cover those costs? Also, the last piece related to fiscal is, as a representative from Sacramento indicated, is there a situation where they've had a deficit and they've had to cover that deficit with other funds within that particular county, or have they been operating at a surplus? So really looking at the budget, the costs, and then what the impacts of those are. Have they had to make some modifications to the fees? The budget on this audit is a little over 2,900 hours of staff time. The reason that may seem high to some of you, the reason we needed to budget that amount is we know we need to visit 3 specific counties, conduct essentially 3 audits, and in this one, since we do have additional staff, what we may be able to do on this audit, if it is approved, is put a couple of teams on it and have teams going out at the same time at various counties, rather than doing them consecutively. We do them at the same time, and that will shorten the time frame for us to be able to complete the audit. Right now, I'm saying 7 months, but again, if we assign more than one audit team to this particular project, we may be able to get it done more quickly. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the auditor? Senator Roth.
Thank you. Madam Auditor, how are you?
I'm doing well, Senator.
In reviewing this audit request and on page 2, number 3, determine whether the licensing authorities are consistently following existing laws, etc. Sub B, collecting adequate evidence to demonstrate good cause. The phrase adequate evidence appears to be somewhat subjective. How are you going to determine what's adequate and what's not, and your determination might be different than mine? Are there standards, or should the request simply be considering whether there was evidence submitted to demonstrate good cause?
Right. I thank you, Senator. I think the first step would be to determine whether they're submitting any evidence at all. Certainly that's the first step. I think what we would need to do, and I think this is what Mr. McCarty is interested in, is understanding what the specific licensing authority is expecting to see for good cause, and it may be different in Sacramento than it is in San Diego. I don't think we don't have the judgment to say that's not sufficient evidence, but if Sacramento County is suggesting they want A, B, and C as their evidence for good cause, is Sacramento County actually getting those 3 elements before they make a determination that this person's eligible for a concealed weapons license? And contrary to that, we would look at San Diego and see what their protocols and their practices are, starting with the state law, and then if each of the counties has something more specific, we would test against that. But I don't think we would be in a position to say that's not sufficient.
Well, certainly if a jurisdiction does not go beyond the mere statement on an application, that might be evidence of, or an indication of a lack of evidence of good cause, depending on how that's handled.
That's a good point. I mean, I think that would be, you want to come work for us? That would be another step we would want to take. So we would ask the county, when you made your determination that this is adequate evidence, then how do you, if it is, information related to I've been threatened and I feel that I need to carry a concealed weapon because I've been threatened in the past or I've been harassed. What kind of evidence is, and I'm using Sacramento County as an example, expecting me to demonstrate to them that that is a true statement? So I think we would press the counties to say, give us everything you do. Do you take someone at their word, or do you actually ask for additional evidence to support their assertion on their application? So I would agree with you.
Thank you. One more question, Mr. Chair, if I may, of the county. This fee issue is interesting to me, and we all understand up here the pressures that counties are under up and down the state for a whole variety of reasons. Now, I'm curious, when the county sets fees at the county level for services provided, whether it's a CCW application processing or something else, do you typically take into account the cost to the county and attempt to recoup that cost in the fee structure?
Absolutely, we do, yes. Yes, sir.
So this CCW appears to be an outlier.
That's exactly right, sir. Yes,
okay,
sir.
Well, interesting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Before we go any further, I would like to invite representatives from the Sheriff's Department if they would like to identify themselves and provide any comments regarding this item.
Move the audit.
Motion's been made. Yes, so if the committee members can reserve their questions until after the presentation from the sheriff. Welcome, Sheriff Jones.
Good morning.
Good morning. Would you like to make a presentation?
Oh, I'm sorry. So, I wasn't given no information about this. So,
okay.
Am I answering questions, or am I making a brief presentation, or?
We're just giving you an opportunity to make any comments. If you don't have them, that is fine also.
I do have some comments.
Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity. Clearly, Assemblymember McCarty and I disagree on the fundamental aspects of CCWs. I was, by all media accounts, a large part of his motivation, if not the only motivation, for some of his legislation that he tried to pass last year. That was unsuccessful. While I understand and appreciate that reasonable minds can differ on whether CCWs should be issued and under what standards, those things are very well laid out in the statute. Those statutes are intentionally left subjective so that the issuing authority in Sacramento County, that largely is myself, can make appropriate determinations based on the people that they answer to, their constituency. That's why you have some jurisdictions that are very restrictive in their issuance and some jurisdictions that are very permissive in their jurisdictions. I obviously leaning on the latter end of that spectrum. But those statutes were designed specifically so for that purpose, and as has the case law that has interpreted them, to maintain the discretion in the issuing authority whether or not to issue them. I wanted to make a couple of quick corrections on the comments that were made by the Assembly member. Number one, he indicated that we in the department had a budget shortfall because of the CCW process and program last year. That simply isn't true. What was reported was that the fees that we charge, which are statutorily set by the state, it's not a county function to decide how much we charge so we can make it cost neutral. It is a function of the state. We charge the maximum fees. The shortfall on that was $240,000. Now, like almost every other service that I or any law enforcement agency provides, we're not in the profit-making or cost neutrality business. Everything is not cost neutral. It is a mandated process that I have to take and accept as many applications as I get. I have no control over who or how many processes I get. But as far as the budget shortfall, I will indicate that at the end of last fiscal year, I gave back to the county $500,000 to the general fund that I came in at under budget, which more than doubled the amount of the so-called shortfall or the overage that the overrepresentation or overcost of my CCW program. The other thing I wanted to clear up is that he indicated that prior to my administration there were 300 permits issued a year, and now it's 8,000 a year. Simply not true. I think what he meant to say is when I came on there was approximately 300 or a little over permits issued countywide, and now there are a little over 8,000 permits issued countywide. It's not a per-year thing. I want to point out, and I've read Mr. McCarty's letter, and his objections are a bit scattered, but I think they fall into general categories. I think he wants some clarity on what that good cause and good moral character aspect means. That is not an appropriate subject for an audit of 1 or 2 or 3 departments. That is a legislative function. If there needs to be more clarity or a standard or threshold for those concepts, then that's a proper province of the legislature to help define those, which is what he tried to do with his legislation last time. As written, they are meant to be intentionally subjective as to allow the most discretion of the issuing authority. He provides some anecdotal information of revocations to suggest, I think, or at least imply that the permits are wantonly issued, but there's not even any implication or assertion that we have issued any permits improperly. I mean, obviously, at the time we issue a permit, we only have the information that's available to us at the time. It's much like a driver's license. If you qualify at the time, you get it. We have no way of monitoring what reckless conduct occurs thereafter, which may impair that ability, that privilege to carry that permit, and it may get revoked. I think a larger percentage of revocations is more an indication of a responsible monitoring system post-issuance than anything else, because clearly we could just not issue them or not monitor them afterwards, have no revocations, and that could statistically suggest a rock-solid process for issuance, but certainly would not be the case. So determining a definition of good cause and good moral character is not a subject of a proper audit. It is a legislative function if that is the appropriate place for it. Determining the appropriate price points for the application, that is also a province of the legislature. If the legislature wants that to be more cost neutral, then certainly the legislature can raise the fees. I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that type of legislation as long as it was done in direct relation to the actual cost. I don't like to lose money on any process that I do, but I certainly don't want to make it cost prohibitive and impair the ability of folks that might need it or otherwise qualify for it to get them. And lastly, there's no allegation or even implication that I'm not issuing or revoking permits within the statutory law or even within policy. It's just that the policy of CCWs and the distinction and the differences among the different jurisdictions caused angst among Mr. McCarty and some of the others, which all of this stuff is outside the province of an audit that's going to cost over $350,000 to conduct. Mr. McCarty's final sentence on his letter reads, "I believe this audit is necessary to provide information of Sacramento County's sheriff's department issuance of CCWs, and if it impacts county services. I respectfully submit that this issue is time sensitive given the rate at which CCW permits are issued and the belief of serious budgetary impact." The awkward grammar and the misspelling of sheriff aside, I will say that my budget is almost $460 million. To suggest that $240,000 is going to impact county services to a great degree as a justification, as a primary and closing justification to authorize the audit, especially when I gave back over double that at the end of the year, coming in under budget by $500,000, I think is misplaced and I think it's an unwise use of state resources. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheriff Jones. Do we have any other affected agencies here with any further comments? Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Greg Reilersdam. I'm a lieutenant, and I'm here on behalf of the San Diego County Sheriff's Department and Sheriff Bill Gore. We don't have a statement, but we're here at the request of the committee and willing to answer questions if you have them.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? All right. Now is the time for committee questions. Senator Fuller.
In regards to the other county, have they been noticed of this hearing and this impending decision so that they could be here today to weigh in about the impact and it sounds like we didn't know until, today, or when did we know that it was going to be LA County, and why does it say other county instead of saying LA County? And how did you work all that out so that they're here and everybody knows?
Sure. Well, we have Sacramento County notified, San Diego, and the third one was to be determined. He's not here. I'll let him speak if he shows up. But Mr. Mendoza alerted us that he would like to add LA County as the third county. So I'm willing to entertain that suggestion, and that would be the third county. And if he comes down and opines more upon that, he certainly may. But it was in the last 24 hours that he had asked that LA County be added.
So I guess I'll just state that, well, I no longer live in LA County and therefore don't really care. I don't think it's really fair that they haven't been noticed properly from the beginning about being included in this study, and I'm hesitant to move forward on a study that might or might not include that county or some other county with their having an opportunity to have a fair and transparent hearing. So I don't know how to phrase that question to you, but can you allay my fears or no?
Did you want to interject on how we would choose the third county and what the implications are for that recipient county for engagement?
Yeah, thank you. Senator, typically it's not unusual for audit requests to designate a particular entity that a member is interested in, particularly their district for Mr. McCarty, Sacramento. Excuse me. But we have had audits in the past where it's been left up to our discretion. Now, certainly the committee can decide that Los Angeles would be the county. If we're left up to us to determine what that additional county should be, the types of things we would consider is making sure we get north and south. We clearly have that with Sacramento and San Diego. One consideration we might think of, we might want a Bay Area county, or we might want a smaller county. We would think about population. We would look to see if there are statistics about the number of licenses that have been issued, that one objective asking us to look at 3 years. And if we saw a big increase, that might be a factor to consider in going to that county. So we wouldn't just de facto say L.A. because L.A. is big. We would consider a variety of factors.
Actually, I am agnostic on which county I am involved. I'm interested in the process. And why I'm interested in the process is I'm not able to determine that there is a specific need for an audit at all because, so far we're saying maybe there's inconsistencies in local jurisdiction, but that's how the law is written, and that's why it is local jurisdiction. We're saying that the fee adjustment might be a problem, so we need to spend $350,000 to see if there's a fee problem when all we have to do is put a bill through at the state that raises the fees. We do that all the time. It's more surprising that we haven't raised them than that we would, keep them the same. And certainly there's no information in the audit from the county supervisors of any of the counties indicating that they have a financial problem as a result of this program. And we've just heard that in one particular county, they don't have a financial problem. So while generally I love audits, as a former school superintendent, I could find out everything. It was my most favorite tool. But this probably wouldn't be at the top of my list for an audit today. We don't, we have a whole year yet. We want to keep you busy with many more audits that we're going to be bringing up for sure. So this is one that I sort of hesitate about putting it on the top of the list at this time, and I think it would be better maybe to bring it up later and have all the counties that might be looked at, and maybe have some letters from supervisors that say this is a real problem for my area budget, or leave it off and don't charge us for the audit. Anyway, thank you for your patience, and thank you for bringing this thoughtful bill forward. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Senator Roth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my record on these issues is pretty clear since I've been up here, but I am interested in the fee, Sheriff, and I guess my question goes to you. Given the challenges that counties have had up and down the state and the challenges that departments have had with respect to budgetary issues and trying to put uniformed personnel on the street and deal with crime and the like, have you been able to do any analysis with respect to the fee structure that we've set apparently at the legislative level to determine what would be an appropriate fee for example, in Sacramento County, to deal with the cost that you face in processing the CCW applications?
Thank you, Senator. I have not gone through such an exercise. I would be happy to do so and cooperate with whatever I could do to do that. Like I said, I'm not opposed to raising fees as long as it does to make it more cost neutral, so it doesn't get to be prohibitive. But I would suggest that if something like that were done, I would suggest that most sheriffs would at least participate in giving data, but I would say it should be a little bit more broad than simply what would be my break-even point, because the cost would vary depending on the jurisdiction. But I suspect that with some responsible effort and cooperation on the sheriff's in particular side, we could come to a reasonable number that would get us closer to that cost neutrality. And I don't think it would have to be raised very much, and that would not be my advocation. Even if it didn't achieve cost neutrality, but still wasn't prohibitive, so it raised it enough where it wouldn't keep people that otherwise would apply, I think you would probably get most sheriffs behind it. But that could certainly be done and would be done cooperatively and not in the context of this forced audit.
Well, I certainly think that should be a discussion that we have, and that should be an exercise that we engage in with a view to make sure that we don't use the fee to accomplish what some are trying to accomplish through legislation, which is to prevent ownership in appropriate cases.
Agreed.
But I would encourage you to do that analysis, because I think that's an issue that we need to grapple with here. And it obviously, the cost perhaps should be and will be different, Northern California, Southern California, interior, coastal, and it probably has to do with your MOUs and cost of personnel and all of the things that the auditor knows well. Well, thank you for your response. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Assemblymember Acosta.
Thank you, Chairman. Where to begin here? I have several questions. You know, Sheriff Jones you mentioned that there was no budget shortfall due to the CCW permits. You mentioned that there's a surplus in your department now. Obviously, that's not coming from the
Correct.
CCW permits, as you seem to allude to. The 300. I'm sorry. How long have you been sheriff?
Since 2010, I've been with the Sheriff's Department since 1989.
Okay. The reason I find that germane is because you said that 300 permits were active, and now we have 8,000. However, isn't that a statewide and a nationwide phenomenon that has actually happened and is not unique to your particular style of issuing permits, et cetera? That seems to be the case in jurisdictions that do issue, unlike LA County, which is very challenging to get a CCW permit. Isn't that your experience, or what you understand that is the case?
If I understand your question correctly, Sacramento is unique in the explosion, I guess, for lack of a better term, of CCWs, because it went from a jurisdiction where it was very restrictive to mine, which is more permissive. So a lot of, I guess, pent-up requests. But most jurisdictions, I have not seen a significant change in their willingness, except if there's a change in administration that has a different philosophy.
Well, that's a willingness issue that you share, that you hold, I should say. But nationally, my research tells me that there is an increase in not only gun ownership but also carrying. We have the vast majority of states are shall issue. Many states there's no permit issued at all. And the reason I think that's germane is that the implication seemed to be that, but for your willingness to issue the permits, there wouldn't be this issue with fees. And I'm just concerned that this could be an end run, as was alluded to earlier, about carrying and et cetera.
I think I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I agree. Obviously the laws in California are unique in many respects,
Mm-hmm.
not the least of which are for gun laws, including CCW laws. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The scope of this, the adequate evidence, as the Senator mentioned prior, and the subjectivity of good cause, I think, is also an issue. There's been conversations that have been had about throughout the state about what's good cause. What is someone who is threatened is one thing. Do you have evidence? Have you reported it to law enforcement? If there's a restraining order against a former spouse, et cetera, that would seem prima facie case of good cause, and yet there are jurisdictions that don't issue even under those circumstances. And I think that's something that we want to be careful here, that we have this subjectivity that's built into it. The notice issued to L.A. County. I'm from L.A. County. I represent, the majority of my district is in L.A. County. I was born and raised and currently live in L.A. County, and I do have issues with them being included. This is totally anecdotal on my part, but I believe that the added cost for the number of permits that LA County issues most likely is probably not necessarily worth the effort if we're actually going to try to look at the cost structure. Such a large county, I think I'd like to hear from the auditor on that and what kind of matrix we're looking at in terms of going from 2 to 3, and then also picking the most populous county in the state at the same time. How is that going to impact?
Thank you, Assemblymember Acosta. When we put this budget together for this particular audit, it contemplated 3 counties. And when we go through each of the objectives, we decide, okay, what type of testing will we need to do for each? So the fact that L.A. County is significantly larger doesn't necessarily have a significant impact on the hours because, for example, say we decide to test 30 permits that were issued to determine whether or not the respective licensing authority is following the protocols or practices for that respective county. 30 is 30 in Sacramento versus LA, et cetera. So it wouldn't really drive up the cost all that much. Same thing with capturing 3 years worth of data. We would hope in Los Angeles County, much of this is electronic data, so we would be able to capture that relatively easily. So the fact that LA County, if this audit is approved and if it's the pleasure of the committee to designate LA as the 3rd county, would not have a significant impact on the cost of the audit.
That makes sense. Well, I appreciate both the sheriff's answer and your answer on that. And, like to maybe come back if something comes up. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Assemblymember Wood, then Assemblymember Baker, and then Senator Mendoza.
Yeah, my question is pretty simple. So my understanding is that and I apologize for coming in late, so I didn't hear all this. I'm going from my earlier reading on this, but my understanding is that the fees being charged are less than the cost for the department to issue the permits, correct?
Correct.
I come from local government, and we went through an entire restructuring of our local government to make sure that the fees we were actually charging reflected the costs of providing the service throughout our city. So I have that, on the basis of that, I have concerns that you would run a shortfall, and to me that implies a gift of public funds to allow something else to happen. And that's my perspective, because we restructured our entire city to make sure our fees were commensurate with the cost it cost us to actually provide the service. So the argument that other public safety programs are not revenue neutral wouldn't hold water with me either on this particular one. So I have no issue with you issuing the CCWs and your change in philosophy around that. But I think the fee, and I would certainly never look at this as an end run, the fee should reflect the cost to the department to actually issue the permits. And so I don't see why, I guess I don't understand why that isn't happening.
May I respond, Mr. Chairman?
That was a statement. That was a statement. Okay. Not a question.
All right. It seems that committee members would be interested in the
they'd like to, sure.
So a couple of things. Number one, we've already gone through that exercise, trying to maintain all of our contracts and all of our services with county-controlled fees, cost neutral. So I agree with you on everything you said. What you probably missed in the beginning is the fees for CCW process, renewals, modifications, applications are all statutorily set by state law. So those things would have to be changed at the state level, excuse me, not the county level. And as far as the comment about gift of public funds, simply because you don't agree with a large number of CCW issuances, it's not a gift, because it is a mandated function of the issuing authority to accept and process as many applications as I get, whether it's 1 or 1,000 a month. I am required by law to take and process as many applications as I get. So if that costs, if I make money on that or I lose money on that, like I lose money in almost everything I do. Patrol, air operations, nothing I do, virtually nothing I do is cost neutral. It's a mandate that I have to do. So I don't have the luxury of spending money, whether on a discretionary basis for that, and I don't consider it a gift of public funds if it's a mandated duty.
Yeah, through the chair, if that's okay. If then I guess I would go back to the question: is why is it costing so much more then? And I think that's part of what, maybe unless I'm mistaken, part of what we're looking at here. Is that unfair?
That's a worthwhile topic to look at
yeah.
the state and legislative level.
That's why the difference. I guess that's kind of the basis for the audit.
Yeah, I've been a lot of back and forth, but I want to interject here too. And this is not a policy-making body right here. We're not a committee. We're not the Public Safety Committee. It's the information gathering, and that's what we're doing here. And I think the questions raised warrant the state auditor to do some digging into some of the counties to see what these cost structures are, to see if there truly is a piece lacking to make sure we get full cost recovery. And I think it is debatable. We seem to think here, county officials, that the sheriff is not charging what they could be charging. He is saying he is. I think that's why we need an audit to go figure out what is in the middle and come back with recommendations how we could potentially increase that amount.
Okay. Mr. McCarthy, you will have an opportunity to give your closing statement. We do have some further questions. Assemblymember Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Member McCarty for the request. I'm really struggling with this one because of what's appropriate policy and what is the appropriate commission that we should direct to the auditor. So that's where my questions or comments will go on this one. It's not to the ultimate policy about CCWs and should there be permissive policies or otherwise. I do believe all of those are more appropriate for a policy discussion and as well as what fees should be. Sometimes when I put forward requests or other members do, one of the first questions we ask is, have you gone directly, what diligence has the legislative office done to get this information on their own if there's ultimately a policy goal down the road? Like, are you able to cover your costs with the current state fee structure? How does this compare to, say, San Diego or another county? Has your office had any opportunity, I think you probably have, but what efforts have you made to gather this information, at least that goes to the real core of the fiscal issues and the fees, as part of the way we research what policy bills we're going to put forward, as opposed to relying on the auditor to do it for us?
Sure. Well, really, this audit is two issues. There's the fee recovery piece, which I think is local government finance, which Mr. Wood alluded to, which we do in local government, and two, the overarching issue of the vetting and good cause. And so it's really two separate issues. And so I had legislation on these issues last year, two separate measures. Mm-hmm. And so the one on the fee structure we went forward with, we had plenty of conversation with the Sheriff's Association, local counties, and we went all the way to the governor's office. The governor did veto a bill. And one thing in talking to the governor's office, which was suggested upon us, is we do an audit to figure out what's happening throughout the counties to make sure it isn't just a one-off issue here in Sacramento, to see what San Diego, which is a vastly different policy than Sacramento, see what their policies are, see what LA counties and others. And so yes, we have, and we feel we need more information and the expertise of our state auditor, which is why we're here today.
And I appreciate that. I saw that in the legislative history. Again, I think that's information you gather as part of a policy discussion, and I'm just wary to use the auditor to get for us what we could get by requesting that information of audits. That responsibility has been put on me when I've wanted to use the audit process to gather information. I think it's important to do that. My next one goes to the fourth item in your request, which again is very policy driven. That's item number 4, determine to the extent possible whether the factors licensing authorities consider before issuing a license should be expanded in state law. This is probably the part that has me most concerned because I feel that is exclusively our job. And our job as a legislature. I value always the recommendations and data that comes out of the auditor's office. I think we should really be careful about asking the auditor to make normative judgments about what, therefore, especially something like this, which is very much a policy, subjective decision that will reflect the opinions of many different counties. I don't know how open you are to removing that. My concern is that we come up with an audit that's based on 3 counties and that we ask the auditor to make a legislator's analysis based on 3 counties. And I just am concerned that then, frankly, the audit might be used to say, well, these are the things we can do because the auditor said we should, and the auditor has a great deal of respect from this body, I believe, when we really should have a much broader analysis. I don't know if you're open to that. It would certainly make me feel better about the audit being focused on the data and the fact gathering rather than a normative, subjective judgment. Are you open to that as a possibility? And maybe having that come, maybe that's a second request. And we might end up working together on legislation about this. I don't know. It depends on what the audit says. But that's a concern I have as item number 4.
I think it's an important issue that I would want to keep in. I would ask the committee of JLAC to consider it. It's a big public policy issue that the U.S. Court of Appeals just weighed in on this over the summer. And we considered doing legislation last year. We did not, but we want to see what I would like to see what all 58 counties are doing, but we can't. It's too expensive. So having an understanding what 3 counties are doing with this. Some would say it's subjective, and some would say they'd like to have it more objective, in the moral good in the good cause requirements. So I think that this is a piece that needs to be included today.
And I appreciate that. I will just respectfully really urge us to. We can do that 50-plus county analysis. That's part of our work as a legislator with our staff and our teams and working with the associations and asking them for that information. And I understand that you'd like to keep that in the request. With that in mind, I would strongly urge that we not pick the 3rd county. Today was the first I had heard that we might be considering LA County. I respect the members who represent that area. That may be something that could have fair hearing, but I would strongly urge us, particularly within the committee rules that we just adopted, to allow the auditor to pick that 3rd county, particularly because the auditor is independent, is able to assess in comparing San Diego and Sacramento, which are 2 very urban areas compared to many other parts of the state that have very different CCW policies, perhaps. I would strongly urge that we not change the audit request to include LA County, as has been discussed, and I know an amendment has not been proposed officially, because we are asking the auditor to make the judgments in number 4 based on 3 counties that we exclusively would be picking. And so I put that out there. And the final one is the need for an urgency or priority measure, which I know was in your request. We do have other audits before. Some of them are related to the university system and admissions policies. Some are related to public safety issues of a broader sense. If you could just speak to your case, make your case for why this should be an urgency and moved up in line to ones that are already in process and been approved by the committee.
Actually, before we do that, from my conversation with the state auditor yesterday, that seems to be a moot point. Could you address that?
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Assemblymember Baker, and I understand Mr. McCarty did include that he wanted this to be of priority. Typically, that takes place when we don't have enough staff to start audits right away. But as I indicated in the status report, the commencement. At the beginning of the hearing, we have staff available right now, so we would be able to start this and most, if not all, of the audits that are approved today next month in April. So the need to make it a priority seems to be a moot point, as I explained to the chairman last night.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
appreciate that.
I think the point was well taken that this is a audit review and request committee, not the policy committee. And so with that reminder in mind, Senator Mendoza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the discussion. I appreciate the author bringing this audit forward. I do support it. I had my concerns as far as how the issuance of CCWs are occurring in our state. Some counties are very generous. Some counties are very strict. I think the 2 choices that you have are 2 examples. They're different, though. I mean, maybe Sacramento is very generous. San Diego began to issue them, and then they were pretty much they stopped because of the court case. And LA County is very strict. Why they're strict, and I think this is where the audit comes in, where I think we could get to the bottom of why there's so much subjectivity. Why some counties have a high threshold, and other ones have very low threshold. Why is it that some police chiefs don't even want to deal with it? They just don't. We let the county sheriff issue it. We don't want to be part of this. There's something there, and I do think that it goes to the heart of what the auditor could find out for us, because I do think there might be an opportunity for us to create legislation to rein in the discrepancies, rein in what's happening out there, and be fair. I don't think it's fair for the one county to be so strict and another one to be so lenient. That needs to be looked at. I do recommend LA County just because they've had several issues. I know in the previous administration they talked about the only way many of the times that they issued the CCW were based on donors. I thought that was unfair because the people that maybe might need it, they might not be a donor, but they have a need. And then the people that don't even have a need, they just want to have it just because they're going to travel or somewhere. I mean, that's just, to me, there's some inconsistencies. I hear on the rural areas they get CCWs because they plan to drive to the inner city. And they want to make sure they feel safe, so they go ahead and go to get their issued CCW. And I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting how that works out. So why don't we get to the bottom of what is causing this such discrepancy? And I think that's why I suggested LA County, and believe me, it's not going to take that much money because there's only a few that are being issued. So that's not going to be the issue. The issue is going to be is why when it comes to good cause, what does that mean? I would love to know what those other counties are doing as far as good cause in Sacramento. I would love to know what that looks like. San Diego, same thing. Wish we could do all 58 counties, but it'll be kind of difficult to get that information. I look forward to hearing back on this very important issue because it is an issue that it's going through the courts at the same time as far as the issue dealing with open carry and CCWs and where the courts are going to end up on this. We don't know. It would be kind of nice to begin to kind of create some clarity as to how these CCWs are issued. So I support the audit, and I would highly recommend that we include LA County. Thank you.
All right. Before we go to Mr. Acosta, we have an issue regarding whether the requester would like to amend his request to specifically identify Los Angeles County. If the auditor doesn't have a problem with that, I don't have a problem with that. It's up to you, to the requester, Mr. McCarty.
Yes, I'm open to it. It was the suggestion of Senator Mendoza, and if that's the will of the committee, I'm perfectly fine having that as the third county.
Okay, so the request that we are debating now then is to have the third county with Los Angeles. We can vote up or down
Mr.
on
Chair,
that.
is it appropriate to go ahead and make a motion and to amend it to include LA County?
Yes.
I'll make a motion to accept the audit request and include LA County to that.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right.
Second, that was just for that's not, you said audit request and include LA County. Yes. You want to include both of those.
So
yeah, you can make a motion and still discuss.
All right.
So I'll make sure.
Okay. So just to clarify, then the motion is to
How about accept the request
approve the request with the amendment that the three counties being Sacramento, San Diego, and Los Angeles.
Yes.
All right. Is there a second? Okay. Senator Mendoza seconds. Assemblymember Acosta.
Well, shouldn't we be voting on the amendment separate from?
Okay. Did you have a?
I don't think that we should be voting on them together.
Actually, because the requester so he's accepted and amending his request. Yes. Mr. Acosta.
Okay. I would not be able to support this in the form that it is now, including adding LA County. I agree with Assemblymember Baker that I believe it should be up to the discretion of the auditor, and I also don't believe that the auditor, and I'll let the auditor answer herself, but that the auditor, looking at the subjectivity or the subjective nature of good cause requirements, etc., to my colleague's points here, that is the appropriate purview of the auditor. I don't believe the auditor can make a policy. Please expand on that, and then I want to follow up. Can you make a policy call on whether or not these are appropriate?
Thank you, Mr. Acosta. No, as I explained to Senator Roth when he asked the same question, when we're looking at adequate evidence to demonstrate good cause, we're going to defer to the licensing authority. So in Mr. Jones, in his decision, if there are certain factors that he expects to see when determining good cause. Is it a restraining order? We would look to see, are those specific factors being included in the application and being demonstrated by that applicant. We will not exercise our own judgment to suggest that Sacramento County shouldn't have issued a concealed weapon license to a particular individual. That, I would agree, is not our place.
Yeah, that's why I have a big issue with 3B. If that were removed, and certainly, well, 3C I have fewer concerns with, but certainly number 4 altogether, we're getting into a policy debate again, not a fiscal management or other debate here. And it's to a point that was made earlier about fees and collection of fees, and I don't mean to be glib here, but somebody mentioned building permits, and frankly, building permits are not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution. I don't have a problem with jurisdictions. I was mayor pro tem of a large city in LA County, and we wanted to be cost neutral and collect our costs. But there are many things, almost everything we do in this building to that point requires the people through paying their taxes to pay for things for others. We have a mechanism through the state, through this body, to collect fees and mandate a fee cap. And if the sheriffs as a whole in California are having an issue with this issue, and they're saying, hey, this is costing us a ton of money, for whatever reason, that's their job, is to come into our offices and come to the legislature and say, we'd like that cap raised. There are many, many, many other issues in this state that we provide for in the tax code. And to the auditor's point, this is the purview, and actually to Sheriff Jones' point, this is the purview and a responsibility of the elected sheriff, the duly elected sheriff. So as it stands right now, unless those two things are out there, I don't see how this can be supported, because it doesn't seem like, as the auditor just said, that they can make a policy call. I think the scope is too broad. So thank you very much.
Are there any further questions from the committee? Ms. Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have concern that we might not be doing this quite the right process way. I don't know if we need to move to divide the question and vote on them separately. I want us to be as efficient as possible in this regard. First, a point of order to clarify. We are voting on an amendment to make the third county that the auditor will be reviewing LA County.
No. My thinking on this is that we did not have a motion to begin with. We had a request from Mr. McCarty. Mr. McCarty has agreed to amend his request, and so we don't have to have any formal parliamentary procedure we are dealing with Mr. McCarty's request here. So I do not believe there needs to be any separate vote.
Thank you for the clarification. That in the rules, it does contemplate that if the ones that we just did, item 14, that if there is going to be such a request to substantially amend the audit, and I think there's some debate as to whether or not this substantially amends, that the chair may ask the committee to hold the request until the next committee hearing. I'm not going to insist on that, but I do think it's good that we follow our order that we just adopted, or at least be clear on what our procedures are, and that we are going to have a vote on whether or not this should be a change to the request. I would very strongly urge that. And to that point, I think our good Senator Mendoza made some good points about why LA may be worth considering. I offer the counterpoint, which is the senator had cited, this is what happens in rural counties. Well, that's all the more reason why we should have a rural or non-urban county left in the discretion of the auditor for doing this report, so that we can have a better understanding of what the practices are in places very different than the other two counties that have already been identified. So with that, Chair, I will defer to you and the members on what is the best procedure here, as long as we're going to vote on whether or not this is the audit as amended with LA County. I strongly oppose LA County being predetermined by the committee for the reasons that we've discussed. I really think we need to leave it open to her discretion, and who knows, maybe she'll choose LA.
All right.
Thank you.
Ms. Baker, you are being a good attorney, and you're referring to the committee rules. I will refer that the committee rules that we just adopted indicates that an audit request may only be amended if the amendment does not substantially affect the feasibility, scope, or cost of the proposed audit. It is my understanding, State Auditor, that the requested change to the audit will not substantially affect the feasibility, scope, or cost of the proposed audit. Is that correct?
Designating what the third county, who the third county should be, does not substantially, in my view, as I answered Mr. Acosta's question about the expense of including Los Angeles or designating Los Angeles County as the third county, that would, in my view, not substantially change the scope of the audit.
All right. So on that basis, I will recommend that we wrap this up and give Mr. McCarty an opportunity to close.
Yes, I realize you have a big list and a big docket after me, so I would just ask that you consider this request. And I realize this is not a policy committee. I don't want to get in debate with our sheriff whether or not what the true definition of a shortfall is and whether or not proper vetting currently exists in instances that were ripped from the headlines in Sacramento or other parts of California. But I think the bigger picture is there are a number of questions that remain unanswered as far as what counties are doing across the state and what policies are in existence. And I think that's what the purpose of the state auditor is, and this will allow us to potentially guide public policy changes in the future. So with that, I would ask that you support this request. Thank you.
All right, Mr. McCarty, I apologize. Want to give any opportunity for any public comment on this item? Please come forward. Please state your name, your position on the audit request, and limit your comments to 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Craig DeLuz with the Firearms Policy Coalition. We have a number of issues with this request. As you note, it's been brought up that first of all, that this is a fiscal issue. You notice that no one from the Sheriff's Association is here making this request. No one from the police chiefs is here making this request. No one from CSAC, which represents counties, is here making this request. No one from the cities is here making this request. This seems to be only an issue in one county with a couple of local electeds basically arguing back and forth, one being the sheriff, one wanting to tell the sheriff how to do their job. I think the media reports play that out. Our other concern is we would very much like to see make sure that sheriffs are in fact implementing the process according to law, and it's relatively easy to do. In fact, civil rights organizations like the Cal Guns Foundation, the Firearms Policy Coalition, have been working for years, spending many hours analyzing and collecting Public Records Act requests, information from those, in order to put together information on every single county policy. And we would encourage the auditor to take a look at that information. We would be more than willing to provide that information so they can see what every county is doing. But this right here, this request, just looking at the request, this is basically a local issue with one individual member of the legislature and a couple of county supervisors who for some reason decided not to run for sheriff but want to tell the sheriff how to do their job.
Thank you, sir.
We don't believe that's an appropriate use of state funds. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for the record, Dan Reed with National Rifle Association, also here for California Rifle and Pistol and Gun Owners of California today who couldn't make it. We have some concerns with this audit. Namely, we think that the good cause determination is not appropriate for the auditor, and there is legislation currently pending that deals with that very issue, as well as a court case that is possibly being considered by the United States Supreme Court. Also, we have some concerns with how the counties are chosen. As was mentioned by my colleague, Mr. DeLuz, there is been some chatter in the paper about possibly a local dispute here. And so looking at these counties in particular, we have 58 counties, and they're all very diverse. We have counties such as San Francisco that have as few as 2 to 4 permits currently active, to Sacramento that has around 8,000, to LA that has somewhere around 540, all with very different populations. And so maybe we should look at a better cross-section if we're going to do that and not just limit it to such a narrow scope. And as far as fees, if this is really a budgetary issue, which does go back to local control, they should also look at the duration of the permit, because a lot of the cost with permits is California has one of the shortest permits in the country. Every 2 years you're going there. It seems like the time you have it renewed, you have to turn around and have to go back. So there's a lot of administrative costs in there, and so that's something that should be considered as extending it out to 4 or 5 years. And as far, one other issue that should also be explored in a separate audit is the DROS fee. We came here last year, and we'd like to maybe explore that again. Again this year in a future request, which is structurally imbalanced and does play into the permit system with significant delays to the issuing authorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe the requester has made his closing comments. I will be supporting this request. I believe it will gather valuable information that can be useful in our legislative deliberations on this important policy area. I do believe that the auditor has addressed the questions as to the good cause requirement in particular, that this is information gathering. It's not taking a position on a policy issue. And I will be supporting this request. With that, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Motion to approve request 2017-101. Assemblymember Marsucci.
Aye.
Marsucci, aye. Acosta?
No.
Acosta, no. Baker?
Not voting.
Baker, not voting. Nazarian?
Aye.
Nazarian, aye. Obernolte? No. Obernolte, no. Rubio?
Yes.
Rubio, aye. Wood?
Aye.
Wood, aye. Senator Roth? Bell? Canella?
No.
Canella, no. Fuller? Laura? Mendoza?
Aye.
Mendoza, aye. Skinner?
All right, we will be placing this on call, and we thank Mr. McCarty and all of the witnesses.
Thank you.
All right, next item is item number 6, item 2017-104, Montebello Unified School District Finances and Operations.
Tony? Mr. Mendoza?
Senator.
You're going to join us on here, or you're going to? Yeah. Please do. They're going to call you up and
Damn.
Oh, Trina. There's a Trina. Yeah.
All right, Assemblymember Garcia, Assemblymember Chow, and I understand Senator Mendoza will also be presenting this request. I assume Ms. Garcia,
Thank you.
please.
I want to start off by thanking the committee and the staff for helping us put this audit together. They've been really helpful, and we shared a lot of their time with us in a busy week. Thank you. I also want to thank my colleagues, Mr. Mendoza and Mr. Chow, who have also been working to make this request possible. I'm going to keep my comments short because we have a number of witnesses here today, but our offices have been inundated with phone calls, emails, petitions to get some questions answered. As a proud product of Montebello Unified and the good work that we have been doing in the district, I just want to be able to lift that cloud of doubt and get some answers. And if things are going well, I'd like to be able to say the district has been doing well. And if we need improvement, I'd like to be able to say, well, these are the directions we're going to be having improvement on. But I think, at this point, it'd be imperative just for moving forward that we have some reliable answers out there. And so there is a sense of urgency in the district, and if this is approved, I would also like to encourage the auditor to work as efficiently as possible without compromising a good audit out there. And so with that, I do request an aye vote, and I'll hand it over to my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members. And I want to thank you for taking time to consider our request to audit the finances and operation of the Montebello Unified School District. I also want to thank my colleagues, Assemblymember Garcia and also Senator Mendoza, for their efforts on this matter. Prior to being elected to the legislature, I previously served as a school board member of the Montebello Unified School District for 12 years. And in fact, I served as board president 3 times. And so there's a long-standing personal connection to the community that the district serves and its employees. The situation that has unraveled in recent months and made headlines across the state prompting frustrated residents and to contact my office is truly disheartening, especially when considering the impact the district's fiscal situation on the 30,000 students, its employees, and families. An independent audit presents a solid foundation for the district and community to build upon and develop long-term budget reforms where necessary to improve the fiscal standing into the future by helping to determine how it arrived at the present situation from what it was before. So with that, I'd like to ask for your approval. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the committee taking up this audit request. In every decision that we make, we must always put our children's welfare in the forefront of all discussions. The needs and well-being of our children must be our first priority. Therefore, we must ensure that public funds are being used where they belong, which is in the classroom. For these reasons, we agreed to joint author this audit to ensure that the 30,000 children and adult students at Montebello Unified School District are afforded the opportunity to thrive. It is our hope that this audit will provide the necessary recommendations to guide Montebello Unified School District in upholding its high level of education, and all while maintaining a balanced budget. As a former school teacher and as a parent, I truly believe in a quality educational environment for all students and educators in our publicly funded schools, and it is essential for us to make sure we do our part to their success. So with that, I also respectfully ask for your support on this audit.
Thank you very much. Let me remind before we open up for your witnesses that the chair's recommendation on this is an aye. We would appreciate your comments to be kept brief. And with that, do you have witnesses in support of your request?
We also have the affect school board member here, so I wasn't sure of the order. Do you want the witnesses in support
She will
first,
have an opportunity to respond as the affected agency.
So
Yes.
we'll start with Montebello Teachers Association.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm Lorraine Richards. I'm president of Montebello Teachers Association. I also would like to add that I am a teacher from Montebello High School, and I am also a graduate of Montebello High School. I am a constituent. I'm also a parent of two that attend Montebello Unified School District in grades 5th grade and also the 10th grade. I'm also married to Mr. Richards, who's a teacher at Montebello High School, and he recently received a RIF after being a teacher in Montebello Unified for 14 years. And I'm requesting that we look at these items more than just the president of Montebello Teacher Association, but it's also hitting in many personal matters in my own life regarding an investment to Montebello Unified School District. I wanted to recap and kind of go back to the 90s when Montebello Unified was stricken with a very difficult financial times. And as a result, the Revenue and Expense Committee had come about, and the members of that committee are Montebello Teacher Association, CSEA, and also administration, which would provide greater transparency for the employees and also the public. I've been actually part of that committee for 14 years, and I've been able to see over the years how effective it has become and how well it could be used. But as time has moved on, we've noticed that there has been some difficulty acquiring documents. Previously, we didn't have to put in for public records requests, and the committee was pretty transparent. We would make a request at the meeting, and then the following month we would have our documents to answer our questions. So the committee has definitely a greater being of just a formality. It is a forum typically for financial situations. Mostly MUSD has greatly, I cannot express how much, but it has greatly benefited from the LCFF formula. And since the inception, the district, it's claiming otherwise with a loss of funds. So there seems to be an inadequate process and controls over expenditures and also other financial activities. So not only is there a concern in the financial areas from the Montebello Teachers Association, we also see a lack of adequate resources and policies to deal with personnel issues and hiring within the district. Lastly, there's a great concern with recently voted upon bond GS from the community. MTA wants to ensure that bond expenditures are consistent with rules, laws, and practices. So lastly, Montebello Teacher Association needs the support of the state during this time of financial need and truly involves the future of our students. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. I'm Dolores Duran Flores with the California School Employees Association. CSEA represents the classified school employees in Montebello. This is the support staff that work in our schools and provide essential services there. They're also the staff who are facing nearly 100 layoffs as a result of the Montebello financial problems. We are deeply concerned about the financial issues in Montebello, including the way that they are handling their layoffs. In December, we were told that we would face 11 layoffs. Over the ensuing couple of months, we were told now it's 77, and as of the last board meeting, it rose to 89. We really don't understand how we got here, because Montebello continues to receive money year after year, more than what they had received, even in a declining enrollment situation. And I think part of that is the LCFF that was mentioned. We understand from looking through the financials at the field level that in 2014-15, between 2014-15 to 2015-16, they received over $40 million more. We also understand we had field staff look at the unaudited reserves, and we see that they had $30 million in unaudited reserves, which is $20 million more than what is required by the state. The other issue is in November, Montebello received a AAA rating from a bond agency. The credit rating agency said, and I quote, "Based on the district's current spending profile and recent funding increases, Fitch expects district expenditures to be in line with revenue. Carrying costs for debt service and retiree benefits are affordable." Montebello's CBO then followed with a statement the following month in December, which is just a few months ago, that said, "This is a testament to the strong fiscal management of the district. We will continue to make smart fiscal decisions that allow our schools to thrive." LA County Office of Ed then reported that Montebello had a shortfall of about $30 billion over 2 years. Montebello then hired an auditor, spent over $70,000 for that auditor, and then the auditor got laid off or fired, or their contract wasn't pursued anymore, and we weren't able to see what any of that their findings were. There's also, as you've seen in many of the media reports and articles, that Montebello faces serious questions about their hiring practices of their top administrators and whether their contracting process had been adhered to with regard to the conflict of interest laws. CSEA's local chapter 505 has just lost trust with the school district, and they actually recently passed a vote of no confidence on the district's CBO. It is time, in our belief, that we need a state audit so that we can make sure that we have the information that we can trust. We say on behalf of the students, on behalf of the community, and the workers, they don't deserve any less. We ask for your aye vote.
Thank you very much. State Auditor, Ms. Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. As the Assembly members and Senator Mendoza requested, this would be an audit of Montebello Unified School District, asking us to look at 3 fiscal years, and I'm going to just put the objectives into 4 categories. The first is service contracts, really asking us to look at their policies and practices with respect to awarding those types of contracts, making sure the process is transparent. Are they monitoring those contracts? Do they have controls in place to mitigate any conflicts of interest? With respect to the hiring process, looking at policies and procedures to ensure that their executives meet minimum qualifications. Are they properly screening individuals? And that the members specifically asked us to look at the current executives and determine whether or not they actually do meet the minimum requirements for the positions. And then the last piece of the hiring process is looking at their policies and practices to make sure that they are protecting against nepotism, conflicts of interest. So how strong are those processes? With respect to expenditures, asking us to identify major categories of spending, and then actually taking a sample, looking at some expenditures and determining whether or not those expenditures were appropriate and reasonable, and what purposes those expenditures were made for. Also asking us to look at how the district has been reacting to declines in enrollment. What changes have they made? What impact has that had on various programs, hiring, staffing, et cetera? What are the things that the district is doing to address declining enrollment? With respect to bonds, they're asking us to look at the adequacy and effectiveness of Montebello Unified's practices for obtaining bond proceeds, and then certainly how are those bond proceeds being used? What are those expenditures looking like? Are they in compliance with the covenants of the bond? And also, how well is Montebello monitoring those bonds? One piece I skipped over, going back to the hiring process, one objective they've asked us to look at is compensation for executives and administrative positions, and to do some comparative to other districts in California with respect to compensation. That's something we've done on other audits, and that's information that's readily available. I wanted to make sure I touched on that. But really, 4 key buckets: contracts, hiring process, expenditures, and bonds. This audit is budgeted right now at about 2,700 hours. That would be about a 7-month audit based on staff, typical staff assigned to a project. Again, this may be a project where we can put more staff on it to get it done more quickly because we have those discrete areas that we've been asked to look at. So I will certainly contemplate that depending upon how many audits are approved today. We'll put resources to this to try to get it done as quickly as possible if the committee decides to approve the audit. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We have a representative from the Montebello Unified School District.
Good morning, Honorable Assembly Member Muratsushi and distinguished members of the Joint Legislative Audit Committee. My name is Joanna Flores, and I sit on the Montebello Unified School District Board. On behalf of our district, our parents, students, employees, and stakeholders, and our interim superintendent, Dr. Anthony Martinez, we'd like to thank you for the opportunity to provide this testimony. As you may be aware, MUSD, like 40 other school districts across California, are currently facing substantial budget challenges and potential reduction in force as we prepare for the next school year. Like other school districts in California, our budget challenges are rooted in a significant drop of student enrollment, salary and benefit increases, pension obligations, and less financial support of public education in the governor's proposed budget. Coupled with years of overspending by previous district board members and past administration officials, the current MUSD board has inherited a sizable challenge as we grapple this year with the reduction in force of teachers and district employees to keep the district solvent. For the record, MUSD has not faced any reduction force since the early 1990s. The district teachers, support staff, administration personnel have enjoyed a steady raises year after year, unlike many other neighboring school districts, to actually remain solvent. Today, there are numerous public questions and unsubstantial accusations about MUSC budgets, protocol, and practices. As a board member, we are very conflicted by the possibility of teacher and district employee layoffs. It is not our position as a board that we must contend with the responsible elected representatives. First and foremost, this board believes our teachers, support staff, and administrators are very talented and dedicated, and we appreciate the work that they do every day on behalf of our students. However, we are charged as the school district board to create policy and ensure that our budget remains solvent. It is not an easy job given the current budget challenges, and it's a big part of the oversight includes ensuring the district's budget money is spent appropriately. There is no room for weak budget protocols and practices, inappropriate spending, and less tolerance for potential fraud, abuse, and misuse of district funds. The call for a forensic audit is something that the board supported as a majority back in December 2016. It was in December that members of the board also began some preliminary discussions with one of our assembly members, Cristina Garcia, to discuss the potential partnership in the state audit. Later discussions among the board colleagues indicated a consensus on inviting the state to partner with the district as we proceed with this audit. So on behalf of the board, Montebello Unified School District, I thank you for allowing us to present this testimony. And I also want to highlight that as we've been waiting for this process, we have LACO, who has assigned us a fiscal expert who is currently working steadily every day with our staff, and also FICMAT, who also has come in to more proactively look at our current state budget crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have questions from the committee? Mr. Obernolte.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question of the auditor. Ms. Howell, one of the primary concerns raised in the audit was the procedure by which service contracts are awarded. And in your analysis, you've proposed to audit a selection of those service contracts in the 3-year look-back period. I'm curious as to what criterion you will use to select which service contracts to audit.
Well, thank you for the question, Mr. Obernolte. We'll look at, first of all, we'll find out what the universe is of those types of contracts. We want to make sure that we select contracts that were let in each of the 3 years, and then we certainly will make sure that we have a mix of the types of service contracts. So we don't want to just select one specific type of contract. Then what we will do is determine, looking at the process for how those contracts were awarded, if there are different processes used, then we would want to select contracts under separate processes to understand why they chose to use separate processes and if it was appropriate to use separate processes. I can't say today, because we don't know what types of contracts have been awarded, if there would be a specific category we would look at. But those are the kinds of things. We want to get an idea of what the universe looks like, then do some analytics on the universe, and then do a more targeted selection of the contracts to address that objective.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, any public comment? Anyone, please come forward. State your name. Please limit your comments to 2 minutes.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, good morning. I'm Michael Egan. On behalf of the California Teachers Association, we're in strong support of the audit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Ryan Rice, Montebello Teachers Association, a member of the Revenue and Expense Committee, an English facilitator. I've been nearly 10 years on revenue and expense. I think one of my big issues, and I'm not hearing it here, is the change in accounting for the LCAP funding because of the goals, and its tie into the old, it's hard for me to get a grip, and I'm a former accountant with Pete Marwick. I don't see how anybody's managing their fiscal policy because they're using one set of numbers, trying to compare it to another. I'm not sure if the legislature thought about that in accounting. I think that's it may find why people are actually in trouble across the state, because they're not really being able to make, judgments, administrative judgments, based on the bad financial data they may be using, because they're not necessarily meshing. That's my experience, and like I say, a business degree, et cetera, everything you want to know. So thank you.
Thank you. Please come forward.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, committee members. My name is Stephen Navarro. I'm currently a 5th grade teacher at Montebello Unified School District. Last year, I served as bargaining chair for the Montebello Teachers Association. It was a contentious year. We went to impasse, and during mediation, neither the school services personnel who represents the board foresaw this coming. The mediator did not foresee this coming, but we are here now. I stand here before you trying to humanize some of the devastation that we are experiencing. There are teachers who have been working for 17 years or more who've received layoff notices. These people have families, they have mortgages, and it's very difficult for them to do their jobs when they're being faced with the possibility of being separated from their students, from their families, and from schools that they serve. Poor leadership decisions have led us here. I'm here before you requesting that you audit our district, because at this point we don't have all the facts. Our students deserve better. Our teachers deserve more. Please help us. Let's not punish the teachers. Help us bring the teachers back, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Alma Horta, and I'm a member of the Revenue and Expense Committee. And we would like the state to audit the district because we believe the funds allocated have not been managed correctly. The purpose of the Revenue and Expense Committee is to oversee the district finances. In the time when the crisis was reported, we in the committee were never made aware that the district was in financial crisis. Our committee should have been notified first so that we would have been able to work with the district. Having an audit would provide a thorough and complete investigation of finances and operations. Thank you for your time.
Motion's made by Senator Roth, seconded by Assemblymember Baker. Seeing no further comments, would the requesting members like to close?
I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Motion to approve request 2017-104. Assemblymember Marisucci.
Aye.
Marisucci, aye. Acosta.
Aye.
Acosta, aye. Baker. Baker, aye. Nazarian. Obernolte. Obernolte, aye. Rubio.
Aye.
Rubio, aye. Wood. Wood, aye. Senator Roth.
Aye.
Roth, aye. Bell. Canella. Fuller. Lara. Mendoza. Mendoza, aye. Skinner.
Thank you. Do we have? We do not have enough votes yet, so the item is on call. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you so much. You bet.
Yes. All right. We are moving forward with item 2017-102, California Community College Districts, Technology Upgrades and Implementation. Senator Pan. Welcome, Senator Pan. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. I am here to request an audit of 3 community college districts to review their technology, equipment plans, and implementation. This audit will help identify best practices for improving technology upgrade processes for community college districts. The education community as a whole recognizes and welcomes the importance of modern technology within our communities and classrooms. And there is significant need for long-term planning in a regular changing environment, as well as ongoing strategic plans for replacing and upgrading technology equipment in an educational institution's master planning. Specifically, we're asking that the audit attempt to look further into the following key issues: to review and evaluate the laws and regulations significant to the audit's objectives, to evaluate current practices and methods for upgrading new technology equipment and upgrades, to identify the stakeholders that currently engage in decision-making about technology policies and technology equipment upgrades at the worksite and district levels, determine if there are requirements that allow input from faculty, staff, and students when determining the need for new and or ongoing training about technologies and education technology pedagogies, find out if there are challenges the districts face that are associated with accommodating technology, services, and training as required by federal and state accessibility regulation, and to evaluate if districts audited are regularly incorporating into operating budgets the cost of continued and sustained staff, maintenance, and training related to technology equipment upgrades. This audit will help improve the technology upgrade process for community college districts. I think we here in the legislature are certainly familiar with some of the challenges with implementing technology, and we want to ensure that we have and work with the community colleges to be sure that we have appropriate processes in place that demonstrate that it's not just about the technology, it's about the people who have to use the technology, faculty, staff, students, and that's incorporated. So I respectfully ask your approval of this audit request. And here to testify in support, I have Brian Ha with the California Federation of Teachers and Suleiman Ishak from the AFT College Staff Guild Local 15218A. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Shah.
Mr. Chair and members, thank you very much for considering this very important audit today. My name is Brian Ha with the California Federation of Teachers, and in the interest of time, I'd like to yield my rest of my time to Suleiman Ishaq, our witness.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Suleiman Ishaq, Political Coordinator for AFT 1521A. I also have the honor and the privilege to chair the CFT Educational Technology Committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify on this very important audit request. This audit will help identify best practices in improving technology upgrade processes for community college districts. I work with disabled students at a junior college, and basically my job is to use technology to help out the disabled students. Properly functioning and updated technology is essential for such students because it is the only way that they can access their classrooms and be successful in college and compete with the mainstream students by using the accommodations provided by this technology. In order to remain on the cutting edge of technology, all stakeholders, including representative unions, have a duty and the right to share in the decision-making technology policies at the worksite and district levels. Identifying and agreeing upon best practices to emphasize user input, support input, maintain equipment over long term will allow for our best use of resources and time. Currently, there is no uniform standard that provides districts with process and policies to ensure technology equipment upgrades. This audit will help address the aforementioned issues and significantly improve technology upgrade process for community college district. I respectfully ask you for your support for this audit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We now have a presentation from the State Auditor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Senator Pan indicated, excuse me, we would visit 3 community college districts and look at a variety of issues related to upgrading technology and equipment. Policies and procedures, certainly practices. What do they have in place for determining when they need to replace or upgrade certain equipment? As Senator Pan indicated, the stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders that are involved in not only developing and implementing the policies, but actually making decisions about replacing and or upgrading technology equipment? In addition, as he indicated, we would look to see if there's input or opportunities for faculty, students, and staff to provide input to those decisions with respect to not only upgrading technology, but the types of training that would need to be available to staff and faculty to be able to fully utilize the new equipment. An objective related to accessibility, certainly evaluating practices that the districts and or work sites at those districts engage in to ensure that they're complying with state requirements, but federal requirements as well. You may recall we did an audit last year or the year before on accessibility requirements at the state, what state agencies are doing to provide accessibility to websites, and this is a comparable type of objective. What types of accessibility requirements are there out there, and what are the districts doing to comply? In addition, what challenges do they run into in trying to comply with the state and federal requirements with respect to accessibility? And then the last objective is looking at the budgets. Over a 3-year window, do those budgets include not only the amounts for the specific technology, but for additional staff if necessary, for appropriate training for those staff, to learn how to use the new technology and to maintain the technology, et cetera. The budget for the audit, 2,480 hours, take us about 6 months to complete. Even though we have to go to 3 locations, we still think we can get it done within that amount of time, staff time. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion by Senator Roth, second by Assemblymember Rubio. We would like to give an opportunity for the California Community College District to respond.
Chair and members, I'm Mario Rodriguez with the California Community College Chancellor's Office. I would just note that you could talk about these concerns with any local government or any state agency across the nation. The Accrediting Commission for Junior Colleges is the accreditor for the 113 colleges throughout the state. They look at the exact same stuff on a 7-year basis. They look that you have a plan, that you have policies in place that are going to allow you to, when technology needs to be updated, that you are updating it. So our colleges, the accessibility concerns, buy-in locally, it makes 0 sense to purchase an expensive technology solution if you don't have buy-in from the right people. Not to say that any state or local government doesn't make mistakes at times. My point is that we're already going through a review similar to this. This is important. This is something that we go through in order to, to ensure that our students are getting the best service possible. So what we just request is that, while we're not opposed to it and we're not incredibly supportive of it, that because this is already occurring, because our college is already inundated with requests from the accreditor, and this committee in past years has also taken a look at how aggressive our accreditor is already, that they work with us and our colleges to minimize the burden that this potentially audit could cause on just 3 districts. So that's what we would request, and we're happy to work with you guys on anything. I would just note that our office has done a lot of work in recent years to promote best practices and to elevate them to do regional trainings. And so whether that's done through this audit or whether that's a work that we do in coordination with Senator Payne's office or with the faculty union, we're happy to have those conversations as well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Public comment? Seeing no one coming forward for public comment, Senator Pan, would you like to close?
I appreciate the testimony from the community colleges. I think, of course, we don't get the information from the creditors. I also do think we've had experience with IT investments. Sometimes they're rather large. We want to be sure that as people are budgeting, that they're incorporating the entirety of what needs to be done to actually make use of that technology. And so I think this audit is going to be very informative for that. And certainly, I too would ask, and I'm sure the auditor will work with the community colleges to minimize any additional burden or disruptions. And in fact, if the college is already doing that, hopefully that we can do this in a way that's going to be very straightforward for the community colleges. So I respectfully ask for an aye vote on this request.
Thank you, Senator. So the chair's recommendation is to support the request. We have a motion. Oh, have we taken the motion? Okay, motion has been made and seconded. Roll call, please.
Motion to approve request 2017-102. Assembly Member Mersucci.
Aye.
Mersucci, aye. Acosta.
Aye.
Acosta, aye. Baker. Aye. Baker, aye. Nazarian. Obernolte. Rubio. Aye. Rubio, aye. Wood. Aye. Wood, aye. Senator Roth.
Aye.
Roth, aye. Bell. Canella. Fuller. Lara. Mendoza. Aye. Mendoza, aye. Skinner.
Thank you. The request is on call. Senator Pan, thank you very much. Next, we would like to ask the last, well, actually, why don't we go forward with the next item, 2017-103, Workers' Compensation System. Assemblymember Daley, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I appreciate you getting me in here.
Motion made by Ms. Baker, seconded by Ms.
Thank you.
Rubio.
This audit seeks an independent assessment of how well our system of fraud investigation and prosecution is working in the workers' comp system. This is a $12 billion statewide system. There hasn't been a truly independent, objective look at the system in a very, very long time. If any fresh ideas can be brought forward to root out fraud and abuse in the system, I think this is a very worthwhile audit. We have a broad coalition of support behind the audit. As chair of the Insurance Committee, I've spent a lot of time on this subject, and I will appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Assemblymember Daley. I will note for your witnesses that we have a bipartisan motion made and seconded, and the chair's recommendation is to support the request. We ask that you keep your comments brief so we can get some lunch. Your witnesses, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Mitch Seaman with the California Labor Federation in support of the audit. As workers' comp fraud is one of the few areas on which you'll find pretty broad agreement among all the different stakeholders in the system. From the worker perspective, there is really no end to the negative effects that fraud has. from not just losing a lot of money that should be going to injured workers, but also it does inspire a lot of really substandard care and sometimes even non-existent care, in addition to a variety of other effects that really don't do any good for anyone in the system, but especially for injured workers. And so the fraud takes many forms, and the fraudsters get more creative by the day. And as a result, it takes a lot of different sets of eyes across different agencies to make sure that we're doing everything we can to root it out and get it out of the system. So, the audit makes sense in terms of making sure that despite all the good work that's been done and all the effort that's been made to find that fraud, we want to make sure that we're doing the best that we can, that we're implementing best practices that we see in other states, that the agencies are communicating the best that they can, and that we're prioritizing the resources the best that we can to make sure that as much of the workers' comp dollar as possible goes to the injured worker. And so we urge your support. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Jason Schmelzer here on behalf of the California Coalition on Workers' Compensation, and also been asked to speak on behalf of the California Chamber of Commerce, both in strong support of the audit. I want to thank Chairman Daley for all the hard work he's done on this issue, but also want to give a nod to the administration, to the DIR and DWC, who've been spending a lot of time and effort on the actual mechanics of fraud, how to detect and prosecute fraud, and help mitigate the effects that Mitch was just mentioning. A lot of good work is being done. One distinguishing factor I think that's important to understand, all of that work is really that work that's in the weeds. It's the getting it done aspect. The audit that Mr. Daley is advancing and that we're supporting focuses on the process. It focuses on allocation of resources and other more 100,000-foot issues. It's designed to make those efforts even stronger and even better. So with those brief comments, we strongly support the audit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Christine Baker, Director of the Department of Industrial Relations. Thank you for the opportunity.
Actually, I'm sorry, ma'am. I wasn't sure if which category of witnesses you fit into. So why don't we hold off on your comments and give the state auditor an opportunity to present her analysis of the request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Assemblymember Daley indicated, we would be looking at workers' compensation, anti-fraud efforts. Clearly, two departments are involved, Department of Industrial Relations and the Department of Insurance. We also would look at some other governmental entities, local DAs in particular. We've been asked to look at some work done at that level. So with the first objective, looking at roles and responsibilities for the Department of Insurance, Industrial Relations, local government, how do they coordinate, how do they collaborate and work together. In addition, looking at, as one of the witnesses indicated, the fraud assessment funds. There's a fraud assessment division, identifies, or commission that identifies the amount to be charged, and then those funds are allocated out to local DAs. Mr. Daley's asking us, how does that process work? How is the assessment identified? And then how is it determined the amount of funds that are allocated out to the local district attorneys? And the next objective is looking at methods used to split those resources between investigative functions and prosecutorial functions. Is there a process for determining that? Does that process make sense? Looking at a 3-year window of how those resources at the local level have been deployed by local DAs. And again, what is the split between investigative and prosecutorial, and how effective has that been? In addition, he's asking us to look at the Department of Insurance and their process for recruiting and retaining peace officers who are fraud investigators. That seems to be a challenge, so he's asking us to take a look at that and see what practices and what types of approaches they're using to get those people on board, and then certainly to retain them in state service. And then the last objectives are looking at comparative to other states, really looking to see what types of activities are occurring at other states, and are there best practices out there that California would benefit from. And then the final objective, and we have a caveat on this, where to the extent possible, identify for the most recent 3 fiscal years, the amount of fraud that's been discovered that was perpetrated by either an insurer, an employer, an employee, medical provider, an attorney. The reason we have a caveat on that is in the past audit we did, and it's been quite a long time, 2004, we found it very difficult to capture that information. We didn't really see a place to find that. We'll exercise our due diligence in trying to get that information, but I did want to let certainly the member knows that, and the committee know that we'll do our best to get that information as well. The audit is budgeted 2,900 hours, take us about 7 or 8 months. The reason, again, it's large, we've got Department of Insurance, we've got Department of Industrial Relations. We're going to need to go to 3 localities, local DAs, area to determine how they're allocating funds and their efforts on the investigative side as well as the prosecutorial side. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll answer any questions members may have. Thank you.
Thank you. From the DIR.
Thank you. Thank you. Christine Baker, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
We want to commend Assemblymember Daley for taking on the issue of fraud. It is horrific. Again, it does both tap the worker and the employer very deeply, so we commend him. Now with more data as lien filings and transparency of medical decisions resulting from SB 863, SB 1160 and 1244, we have many tools needed to prevent, identify, and prosecute fraud. We responded to questions posed by Assemblymember Daley, and in May of last year, Labor Secretary Lanier asked the DIR to establish working groups, which we did with key stakeholders, labor, employers, providers, insurers, TPAs, enforcement groups, to review the research to date and also provide an analysis of the problem with strategic policy recommendations. Those were considered by the governor, approved by the governor, and by the legislature. In fact, when the DAs advised us that the convicted providers were funding their defense with liens, we worked closely with your office, Assemblymember Daley, to really identify how we stay those liens. We now have 267,000 liens stayed in our offices. They are not moving forward. These are of the indicted folks. We have the convicted people now getting hearings to be suspended from participating in the workers' comp system. There still is an area of premium fraud that needs to be addressed. Those are all outlined in our reports. We also are expecting a report from RAND that was commissioned as a result of these stakeholder meetings. The RAND report is subject to come out in the next 2 or 3 weeks. It's being peer-reviewed and ready for publication. We feel very strongly that we're totally underway right now of implementing key laws, key issues that were identified through these policy works, and we're working very closely with the Department of Insurance. We've entered into an MOU to share information, to share data, and to have periodic meetings. We've asked budgetarily for additional funding for supporting our efforts. And we also have identified some cleanup legislation that needs to happen. I think that really, possibly the audit needs to be, if an audit is to proceed, it really needs to be very narrow in its scope. I don't want it to interfere with all the work that's underway right now, because we're all the same people. We'll have to stop and focus, refocus, and do this instead of really addressing the fraud. That's my concern. Resources will be deployed and redeployed to do that instead of what we've scoped out as implementation of addressing anti-fraud issues.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee, starting with Senator Roth.
So what specific issues was RAND asked to address in the report? And how do those issues, compound question, how do those issues relate to the issues that are requested in this particular?
They're looking at other systems such as Medicare fraud, other states, other medical fraud detection systems, and they're making recommendations from that review. They're also looking at types of fraud that are identified in the workers' comp system and what steps can be taken to mitigate those issues.
It sounds as if then that the RAND report, when it comes out, and the issues addressed in that report will not necessarily mirror the issues that are asked to be reviewed by the state auditor in this request?
On funding, no. And that's why I'm speaking to the idea of a very narrow scope that would look if funding and resource utilization is an issue that is not being looked at through the RAND report.
Well, the reason I asked the question, obviously, at $300,000 or $400,000 a whack, if there's a report being generated by an independent organization covering the same issues as this request, then I would be perhaps interested in having a discussion with the requester about whether we postpone action on the request pending receipt of the report. But if the report does not mirror, and the issues in the report do not mirror those that we're dealing with today, then that's an entirely different issue. And my understanding is that they do not.
I think there may be some overlap in some areas. So I think it would be prudent to wait for the RAND report and then step back and take a look at how the study should be undertaken.
Well, my other concern is that if, in fact, we're dealing with somewhere between $50 and $60 million a budget year in terms of the money that flows toward workers' comp fraud investigations, and the fact that that money is distributed among a variety of state and local agencies and entities, I'm interested in finding out who actually controls the process. So if I want to look at one person and hold that person and that office accountable for results, who do I look to? And I asked a few questions during a budget subcommittee floor hearing on the Senate side last week, and the answers were not very clear to me. So perhaps we do need an audit to determine who's on first and who's calling the shots.
I think we could get those answers to you. There is a process. There is a fraud assessment commission that estimates and distributes and makes recommendations to the Department of Insurance. There is a process in place.
But if I'm not satisfied with, if I want to know how local county district attorneys utilize the money that's allocated to them, and does someone set goals and objectives, and is there a system of metrics that's applied to the county DAs to determine whether the money is effectively utilized, or rather should it be redirected back to the Department of Insurance for investigation or the DIR? I guess that would be one question. The other one is, why do we have all of these entities doing investigations, and should not one agency do the investigation and then forward the files to the appropriate prosecutorial authority to launch the court case? I guess that's question number two. And
that's been good questions.
And maybe maybe I'm answering my own series of questions, in that maybe we do need a state auditor to take a look at this problem. I'll stop with that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Roth. Any other questions from the committee? Let's see. Let me follow the... Mr. Daly, would you like to respond as to the overlap issue?
Well, I'd say one example, and I thought the questions were excellent, and I agree with all the questions. With this many agencies and parties involved in the process and personnel turnover, let's not forget that issue, the accountability is very important. I want to say the DIR has impressed me and my staff with the progress they've made in this area. However, there are structural issues that must be looked at. And here's an example. The insurance department, separate from the DIR, has told me a few times, in fact, they asked me to carry a bill last year to deal with their retention problems with peace officers. They have their own investigators. They've had a hard time retaining investigators, but there's no context for how to solve that problem.
Mr. Daly?
Yes.
I apologize for interrupting your presentation. Apparently the pro tem has called for the senators to return to the room. I don't know if there are comments that are other than in support of the request to get the senators' votes on record and to take care of this matter. unless there's something pressing.
Well, Assembly Member, I'm Robert Harrell with the Department of Insurance, and we're one of the departments specifically mentioned in the audit request. So if I could equally to Director Baker take a couple minutes. And I believe, Senator Roth, I can be helpful perhaps in some of the questions that you just posed a moment or two ago. If I could just provide some very brief, broader context. Okay. Commissioner Jones has made fighting fraud a very top priority of his administration since day one.
Okay, hold on, sir. So I understand the senators do need to leave. We will be after your comments, and we'll go through the former procedure. We will be opening the vote for placing it on call for the senators to vote on. Yeah. Yes.
I would like to, if you can.
I'll try it, Senator. First of all, the Fraud Assessment Commission, who has a representative here, by the way, gubernatorial appointees, I think can speak more about their process. There is a delineation of the resource allocation. The Department of Insurance gets roughly 40% of the monies that are distributed, and we use that money for investigations. And we then pass along through those investigations the relevant information to DIR, and in many cases to our law enforcement partners from district attorneys' offices throughout the state. And furthermore, the resources that go to DAs, the Department of Insurance regularly audits what happens to that money and whether, in fact, what's happening to that money is being used appropriately. So I just want to put it in a larger context that there is regular auditing. It may not be exactly 100% of what the Assembly member is talking about in his request, but there's regular auditing that goes on in this area right now. When combined with the upcoming RAND report, in which the Commissioner believes that there is significant overlap between that forthcoming report and what potentially is on the field here, we think pausing is probably the better way to go. Finally, as to Assemblymember Daley, who we've been pleased to work with on fighting fraud over the past few years, on this retention issue, we did ask and have been asking actually for many years to resolve a pay differential issue that we have, not uniquely the Department of Insurance, but that a number of state entities that have investigators have vis-a-vis the Department of Justice and also CDCR, the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Which is to say, and we provided actually detailed information to the Assembly member last month, going back half a dozen fiscal years in terms of every person that we've lost, where they have gone, and what the pay differential is. In sum, people are leaving this department and other state entities, ABC and others, to make, in some cases, 10, 15, 20% more at DOJ and CDCR. We certainly don't begrudge those choices that those individuals are making for their families and their careers, but that is a problem. That gap, we believe, is going to be narrowed based on our understanding from the administration to reduce that pay gap down to 5%, but that is not pay parity. And so that's been a challenge, and we've asked a number of folks to be helpful to us to try to close that gap. It's the single biggest reason that we lose people on a regular basis. Not even to mention, occasionally we lose folks to DA's offices or to local police departments that have, particularly in some cases, a generous compensation package that folks are making decisions on their own about. So I appreciate the chairman giving me a minute to try to put it in some context, but we do have a number of concerns. We think now is probably not the right time for this audit.
Questions? No questions. How are we going to handle it? So we will have all items on call and
Mr. Chair, could I just have a few comments?
Of course.
Before I go, I just appreciate the feedback there. And we understand that, the Department of Insurance, they receive tens of millions of dollars every year to fight fraud, and they employ law enforcement to kind of help them carry this out. And this audit would just simply take a look at where we're having our best return for our money. Okay, it's not about whether it's appropriate, but it's more about is it effective, right? And I think that's what we're trying to get to. So I would really urge the committee to support that. I know I have to go, and I appreciate the comments, but thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you. And I think we are all getting having other commitments to move on to, and so unless there's, I get a strong sense that this is going to be supported, notwithstanding some of the concerns raised about the overlap, about the timing. Want to see if there's any public comments? Seeing none? Oh, okay.
quickly register my support. Jeremy Mercer, American Insurance Association. We are in support of the audit.
Thank you, sir.
Mark Zeckman, Association of California Insurance Companies, in support of the audit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Jennifer Lance-Snyder. I'm the head deputy of the Healthcare Division for the LA County District Attorney's Office. I just wanted to let you know that a lot of the information that you're seeking already exists in annual reports that are generated by each county that include both statistical and narrative information that identify not only what we are doing and who we are working with, but actual statistical data. So much of what this audit seeks already is produced on a county-by-county basis. Much of those reports are public record.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Scott Sways, Assistant District Attorney from Santa Clara County. I just want to just support a little bit to Deputy Commissioner saying regarding the grant process. The grant process is a county that's receiving the grant, and many of the county in the state do receive the grant. The grant is a competitive process where there are measurements set up to basically measure the proficiency of fraud fighting. Now, those funds are not promised or entitled. Each county, including our county, over the years, our funding has increased because our program has been deemed to be successful, and our funding has been cut as well because our program hasn't been successful. So there are measurements in place for the grant process, rather than what I've participated in other different programs where the grants are entitled. So, well, if you put up this many, you have this many drivers, this year, this amount of money. So it's a little bit different than the other grant process that we work in. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further public comments, Mr. Daly, we've heard points about overlap, about the timing, about the RAND study. Would you like to respond?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Notwithstanding the respect I have for the Department of Insurance and the DIR and all the local DAs and all the work that's going on, this subject deserves an independent, fresh look. There's too much money in the system and too much money being spent chasing fraud to not make sure we get the best bang for the buck, we get the value, we have the best systems in place. It deserves a fresh, independent look. I appreciate your attention to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The chair's recommendation is support. Motion's been made and seconded. Yes. Please call the roll.
Motion to approve request 2017-103. Assembly Member Mersucci. Aye. Mersucci, aye. Acosta.
Aye.
Acosta, aye. Baker. Aye. Baker, aye. Nazarian. Obernolte. Aye. Obernolte, aye. Rubio. Aye. Rubio, aye. Wood. Aye. Wood. Senator Roth, Bell, Cannella, Fuller, Lara, Mendoza, Skinner.
Thank you very much. That item is on call. Last but certainly not least, we have the consent calendar item. Thank you, Mr. Daly.
Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion to accept the consent calendar.
Okay, before we do that, we do have some procedural steps that we need to take. We need to suspend. Can I get a motion to suspend JLAC rules 13 and 15 so that we can do that?
So move.
Roll call, please.
Assembly Member Mersucci.
Aye.
Mersucci, aye. Acosta.
Aye.
Acosta, aye. Baker. Baker, aye. Nazarian. Obernolte. Obernolte, aye. Rubio.
Aye.
Rubio, aye. Wood. Wood, aye. Senator Roth, Bell, Cannella, Fuller, Lara, Mendoza, Skinner.
All right. Do we have the votes on that? We do not. Can I go ahead and do the consent calendar without suspending? I don't think so. Procedure. Yeah. Okay. Unfortunately, we cannot take up the consent calendar until we suspend the procedural rules. We do not have the votes for the. Yeah. And so we will have to take a recess, and our committee staff will be in touch with your offices as to the lift of the call. Thank you very much. All right. Yes. So we are taking a recess.
Thanks. Let me not tell you what I know. Hold on. Sir, can you mute the mic?
3. Nazarian. Senator Roth.
Aye.
Senator Roth, aye. Bell. Cannella. Fuller. Lara. Mendoza. Skinner.
Thank you.